Jennifer Steele is an award-winning author and journalist who lives in many countries, currently London after evacuating from Uzbekistan. Her third book, the novel Exile Music, which Zach's going to give you a link, you should buy from an indie bookseller, was published by Viking on May 5th. It follows the lives of a family of Austrian Jewish musicians who seek refuge from the Nazis in Bolivia in 1938. Her novel, The Ambassador's Wife, published by Doubleday in 2015, won the 2013 William Faulkner William Wisdom Creative Writing Competition Best Novel Award and the 2016 Philip McMath Post-Publication Book Award. And that is just scratching the surface. So go to our website, go to her website for more. So let's get to it. Because, okay, so Jennifer, I'm going to ask you the Zach Powers standard writer setter question. Who the heck are you?
All right. Well, I am having a bit of an identity crisis at the moment, but I'm a writer of both fiction and nonfiction. So I write both novels and I've written a memoir. I've been a journalist for 15 years. I'm a theater person. I like to do ballet in the privacy of my own home. I'm a novelty junkie.
You're in the privacy of your own home. Do you want to do a little dance?
But I'm not. But the window's open.
Okay.
Yeah, I like new things all the time. I don't even like to walk the same route twice. So it's kind of convenient that I'm married to a diplomat and we move around a lot. And when we're not moving, we get evacuated. So we kind of, half of our moves are against our will and half of our moves are we choose. So, but it's a pretty great life. So I'm also a mother of a 10-year-old. And my husband is still in Uzbekistan and we have no idea when we'll see him again. And I also teach writing to university students. And yeah, maybe that's enough to start out with. What do you think?
All right.
Is that enough? Okay.
I think that's enough. And I get to decide. So there we go. So, all right. So tell us a bit about the book. I would hold up a copy, but I had to get a PDF. Hold up my laptop, please. Oh, there we go. Exile Music. So I would love it if you give us an intro. Tell us a bit about the book, and then please read a section.
Sure. So the main character of the book is a young Austrian girl named Orly. She lives in Vienna. Her dad plays viola with the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. Her mother is an opera singer. So she's grown up her whole life around music. There's a soundtrack to her life. She has a brother she adores, and her closest friend lives in her same building. And they were born on the same day in the same building. They've grown up together. Orly's Jewish, her best friend isn't. And then as the Nazis approach and the Anschluss happens and Hitler takes over Austria, and the world grows more dangerous for Orly and her family every day, she and her close friend Anneliese escape into an imaginative world together, and her parents start frantically looking for a way out. But at that time, they were encouraging Jews to leave while removing their capability of doing that by taking all their money and freezing their assets and not giving them visas and things like that. So by 1938, there were only 3 countries in the world still granting visas to Jews. That was the Dominican Republic, Bolivia, and Japan-occupied Shanghai. So my characters only managed to get a visa to Bolivia. So they go off. Orly's brother had to escape earlier, so he's not with them when they go to Bolivia. So they've come from this comfortable life in Vienna where they could have a professional life as musicians. And they had extended family all around them. And suddenly they're in the middle of the Andes in La Paz, which was not much more than a smallish city at the time. One actual survivor of this time period said when he arrived, he thought, city, this isn't a city, this is a village. You know, this can't compare to Austria. But of course, it is also stunning. But there's some serious challenges. They arrive in this country not knowing the language, not knowing anything about the culture, not having any money. They've lost everyone they've loved. They have lost their ability to pursue their professions. So they have to rebuild their life. And a lot of the book talks about how they use music and other art forms like poetry and whatever to help them adapt to their surroundings. We might get into more of that later.
We will.
Yeah. So I won't go too much more into it except to say that Orly's mother stops singing when they get there, although Orly and her father continue to be involved with music, and she turns to other things which have somewhat disastrous consequences for her family. And then after the war, the Nazis show up in La Paz. And yeah, and do you want me to talk about, oh.
No. I want everybody to buy the book, because you will not, you'll be so invested in the world that you've created. Can you read us a few pages, please?
Sure. I thought it probably would be simplest just to read from the start, unless there's another section.
I like it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go with that. For now. So the book is structured like a symphony, so it's in 6 movements, and this is there's an overture, even though that's more of an opera thing. But anyway, when I think of Austria, I remember what a child remembers. Details as vivid as the bright shards of a dream. The coffee-warmed air of the kitchen, the rough fabric of my father's suits against my cheek, the chalk dust of my classroom tickling my nose, the ice-crusted snow in the Jesuitenwiese meadow that cut my eyebrow open when I fell off the toboggan halfway down the slope. My Annalisa. My parents' voices in the kitchen as I hovered, still and silent by the door, secretly listening. It was important then to listen. I remember the tang of my mother's apricot jam spread over a thick layer of butter on crusty bread, the fungal stink of my older brother's dirty sports clothing on the bathroom floor, the earthy scent of the square olive oil soap that was always slipping into the sink. I remember a plum tree in our small communal courtyard that dropped its sour sweet fruit onto our terrace. They were a dark, dusty purple, more oval than the green ones we would eat in Bolivia. In Vienna, Annalisa's mother collected the dropped fruits and used them to make torts. I remember my mother's voice in our parlor, starting off low and gathering the energy to soar. I remember the scent of rosin on horsehair, the vibrations of my father's viola, how I could feel the notes on my skin even after he stopped playing and I was in bed, listening only to the silence. I remember the inky smell of my school books as I cracked their spines, the sound of Frau Fessler's ruler smashing into my desk when she caught me with a book open on my lap during math class. The way the fruit gummies from Weiss's get stuck in my back teeth, so I had to pick them out with my fingernails. I remember the damp heat of Annalisa's hand as she folded it with mine for the last time. I remember our neighbors' long coats decorated with flocks of badges saying only, "Ja." The swastikas on every armband and flag, pinned to every lapel, painted on our sidewalks. They even fell from the sky, flurries of paper spiders dropping down on our heads. I remember the newspapers my parents hid from me under sofa cushions. I remember lying awake, twisting the satiny border of my blanket in my fingers until my mother came and curled around me. I remember her breath on my neck, the ice of her fingers on my spine, stroking my skin until I drifted into dreams. The bland quotidian details, the textures of ordinary days, seared themselves most permanently. Except for Annalisa. Annalisa, who was neither bland nor ordinary. Annalisa, who was more a part of me than not. Our mothers had birthed us in the same building a week apart, and from then on, there were no divisions between us. The 3 syllables of her name were my first song. Is that enough, or do you want me to read more?
Oh, I want you to read the entire night, but we're here to. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we're here to talk craft. We're here to talk.
Okay.
You're actually not a 9-year-old Austrian girl, are you?
No.
So, what got you interested in this topic?
Okay, so I moved to Bolivia in 2012. My husband had taken a job.
As one does.
Yeah. My husband had taken a job as the head of the delegation for the European Union. So he was taking a break from the British, he's British. He was taking a break from the British Foreign Office to work for the EU. So we all moved to Bolivia. My daughter was about 2.5 when we moved there. And very early on in our first year in Bolivia, Tim came home from work all kind of inspired and said, I'm learning so many interesting things. I just came from a meeting with the Austrian consul, and did you know there were between 10 and 20,000 Jewish refugees here in La Paz during World War II? And I hadn't known that. And I'd read a lot of novels about Jewish refugees in other parts of the world, certainly in the US, but also elsewhere in South America. But I didn't know that La Paz had a sizable community of refugees. And I wasn't aware that there were any novels about this community. And it wasn't long after this conversation with my husband that I met the son of one of these refugees who was born the year his parents fled Poland. His parents had lost, their daughter and their parents had been murdered by the Nazis, and almost everyone in their entire village was massacred. So his parents managed to get to La Paz, and that's where John was born. He's still alive. He's a good friend. And so the more he told me his stories, the more interested I became in the situation. A lot of these refugees were musicians. A lot of them were from Vienna or Berlin. Yeah.
Why? Wait. Why were a lot of the musicians?
I don't know. I think just a lot. Maybe the artistic community were people who whose families had enough money that they could afford to do something impractical with their lives, and therefore they were people who came from more educated, wealthy families who therefore were able to get visas. I'm not sure of that. But that is a good question. There was a certain randomness as to who got visas and who didn't. So there was no organized effort to grant. In fact, there was an organized effort to get Jews who were willing to work in agriculture, not artists. So the visas that were offered to most Jewish people from Europe wanting to come to Bolivia were agricultural visas. They had to agree to work the land in exchange for refuge. And of course, these were urban people who did not have experience farming. And when they were sent down to these colonies in the jungle, they lacked the natural immunity to these tropical diseases, and many of them died. And those agricultural colonies ultimately failed. But the majority of them stayed in La Paz. Even the ones that had agricultural visas often just avoided the law and stayed in La Paz because that's where there were better job opportunities and where their community was.
I mean, this it's freaking fascinating. And I have to say, Jennifer has agreed to chat with people afterwards when this is over, but we got to talk craft. We got to talk craft.
Okay.
This book, the structure of this book is, to me, a 3-dimensional chessboard. Well, no, because chess is adversarial. The book isn't. Well, anyway, can you describe the book's structure? How did you come up with it? What elements did you consider? You've said that it's not an overture. It's a what musical reference?
A symphony. It's a
It's a
symphony.
symphony.
Yeah, and
But,
yeah.
but can you explain, because it goes through decades and it goes through music. Can you just talk about how you crafted this phenomenal structure?
Okay, I may have said this earlier when we spoke, but when I do my first drafts, they are really messy. And my first drafts I think of as kind of generating clay that my millions of successive drafts then shape into something. So the structure is not the first thing for me. So what I started with was the germ of the story that my husband brought home, and I combined that with an imaginary world my daughter had created, and then started writing this little girl. And because I was imagining if I were, so I started with that. And then I tend to write in scenes. I write short scenes, and then I end up shuffling them around until they make the most sense. And then I look at, once I have a whole draft down and I know where it ends, then I have to rewrite the whole thing so that everything adds up to that ending. And then I have to look at the pacing, where things are slow, where things are too fast. So places I need to fill in, places I need to cut. Yes.
How do you know that? How do you know where it's slow or fast?
Um, by rereading, and sometimes rereading out loud and taking breaks between looking at the draft. You have to come back to it with fresh eyes every time. So there's a lot of different techniques for distancing yourself from your own work to do self-editing. So, and the simplest is just put it away for a little bit, and then when you return to it, you will see things you didn't see before. This almost never fails me, but you can also print it out. You can hang it on a clothesline, and then let's say you highlight, and then you can see, okay, I've got, Vienna's this long and Bolivia's only this long, but Bolivia needs to be this long. And you can look at whether all your chapters are too short or you have 3 really long chapters in a row. Like if you print it out, you can see all that, or if you spread it on the floor. So there are a lot of different techniques. Susan Bell, do you know Susan Bell's book, the Artful Edit? It's one of the best books I've ever read about writing, and she talks a lot about, it's all about self-editing. But for me, the book is about writing, because all the artistry for me comes in the rewriting and the edits, and what I've done. So the symphony structure came later. It happened after I'd already sold the book, actually, and I was talking with my editor about how to structure it. And I listened to a lot of, like when I was listening to the Austrian section, I listened to a lot of Mahler, a lot of other contemporary composers and conductors. And then when I moved to Bolivia, I listened to Bolivian music and other South American, Latin American music. So I was thinking about Mahler a lot because he kept coming into everything I read. I read a biography of Mahler. And then I noticed that his Third Symphony, I kind of had the book in 6 sections by that point. And I was thinking, well, most symphonies don't have 6 movements. But Mahler's Third Symphony is one of the only ones that does. So I thought, well, this is perfect. I've been listening to this symphony on repeat. It's relevant, and it provides a structure that makes sense for this book. And music provides a way for my characters to connect their past to their present, kind of like the structure connects the book as a whole. There's all different kinds of ways that music pulls the pieces of this book together, and the musical structure just underscores that.
So underscores, nice.
Yeah.
So do you have a musical background?
No.
Okay, so that's got to be like a shoehorn into discussion of researching for historical fiction, because your books are so incredibly incredibly credible. Great, that's great. Zach, can you edit that out of this video? So what is your research process? And how long does this all take? And anyone want another glass? Okay.
This book took about 5 years to research, and I basically researched it up until it went to the printer. There were just, I mean, I could research this till the end of time. I mean, there's such a vast wealth of material from Austria that it's overwhelming. You can't read everything there is. However, when it comes to Bolivia, where almost nothing is digitally archived, there's very little from a technical background you can get to unless you're in the country. And so I relied a lot on the people I know in Bolivia, the people I met in Bolivia, the interviews I did with them while I was there. In terms of the music, how I researched that was, okay, so John, who I mentioned earlier, he was a musician. So he was one of the first conductors, not the first conductor, but one of the first conductors of the Bolivian Symphony Orchestra, which formed just after the war in 1945. So John was a musician, and he talked to me about some music. And then I started studying music of the period. And I wasn't just interested in the music that the dad would have played with the Philharmonic or the music the mother would have sung. Those were of great interest to me. But I also wanted to know what kinds of popular music was going on at that time. What would Orly have been listening to? What were, and I got in touch with the most incredible band. Oh gosh, I have to remember their name. It'll come to me. They perform 1920s music almost exclusively from Germany. And a lot of the songs they perform are songs that would have been popular when Orly was growing up, like My Gorilla Has a Villa in the Zoo, and My Little Green Cactus, and all these amazing songs. So I listened to those a lot, and I got in a correspondence with their keyboard player, and he actually sent me references. He sent me a lot of musical references. He sent me documentaries to watch. So he ended up being really useful. And then I traveled to all the places. So travel was a big part of my research. So I went to Vienna, I went to Genoa because I wanted to know what the view looked like as my characters were leaving Europe. What was the last thing they saw as they were leaving Europe, as they were being brushed off the sleeve of Europe. So travel was a big part of it, but in my travels to Vienna, I met a man who connected me with an opera expert who was useful in finding archived information. I mean, I did actually, every date that Orly goes to the opera, that is an opera that actually was playing on that date with that cast. So that in itself took me forever, because those archives were not easy to navigate. Yeah. But perhaps, yeah.
So wait, so you spent 5 years researching, and
yes.
How did you organize this incredible wealth of knowledge that you gained, and did you know where you were going with it? And then how long did the writing take? Because that's something everybody always wants to know. And there are starting to be questions in the chat. So after you answer my very large question, I'm going to go to the chat stuff, and then, right, that's it. That's the end of my sentence.
Right. Well, I tend to write and research at the same simultaneously because I get antsy and I have to get things down, and little scenes come to me like little shards, and I have to put them on paper. So I have various files of things. I'll have a file in Vienna, a file on, I'm not a terribly methodical writer, I have to say. I'm kind of messy in the beginning. And it's only later on I get more organized. But a lot of the research I didn't know I had to do until I got to a scene in the book. For example, the first time I wrote about the mother cooking in Bolivia, I thought, okay, I know how I cooked in Bolivia when I lived there, but I have no idea what kind of stove someone would have cooked on in 1945. And of course, cooking in La Paz, I fortunately knew from experience, is quite different because it's at 12,000 feet and you're at high altitude, you've got that change in cooking. But then I found myself spending the better part of an afternoon watching YouTube videos on how to cook over a kerosene oven, and that you had to pump the liquid into a gas and then set that on fire. And that was something I didn't anticipate spending an afternoon doing, watching videos of kerosene cooking. But that was really important. And even if it just informs one sentence. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'm writing a scene and I come to a bit that I don't know. I'll just put a little TK in it, which was my journalist abbreviation for to come. So I know that has to be filled in later. So that way it doesn't interrupt my flow when I'm writing. I'm just like, some kind of stove. I don't know how it works yet. I'll get to this later. And then same with music. Like I'll have Orly singing a song. I'll fill in what she's singing later once I actually know what she would have been singing. And so I wanted to be writing at the same time I was researching, because it's only through the writing that I know what kind of research I'm going to need. Because I have no idea, it's too broad a topic, right? There's too much information for me to just randomly research refugees fleeing Europe for South America. I mean, I'd be reading for the rest of my life.
Right.
Yeah, so I have to be kind of writing at the same time so that I know what I need. I mean, inevitably, you end up doing 1,000 times more research than you can use. So I've got all sorts of little tidbits I wish I could have squeezed in somehow. But I also, yeah. So I used to, I also did a lot of reading of personal accounts people had written, not just the ones that were published, like The Hare with the Amber Eyes, which is a fairly well-known account, and The Last Waltz, those books. But I also read a lot of self-published memoirs people wrote just for their family, that weren't intended to be promoted commercially, but somehow came into my clutches. There was a really interesting book written by people, it wasn't written by a Jewish person, it was written by a miner from Canada, I think. And, he and his wife—
M-I-N-E-R or O-R?
M-I-N-E-R. Yeah. So he had included a lot of descriptions of daily life, like what foods they could get, what foods they couldn't get. Because what I find is a lot of these memoirists wouldn't include the stuff I really needed. I'm like, come on, write about what you're eating, write about whether or not you can get canned food, write about whether you have butter. I just like, you're not answering the questions I need. So that's the frustrating part of reading all these memoirs. You get like a few shards of information from each of them, but I guess they assume certain bits of their life aren't of interest. But of course, everything was of interest to me. I wanted to know what kind of games they played in school. Like, what would you have played with another kid on a sidewalk? So I interviewed Leo Spitzer, who wrote Hotel Bolivia, and he gave me the games that Orly plays with her Bolivian friend, Miguel.
So Jennifer, you are meticulous. I mean, you are world building in a J.R.R. George Martin. Never mind, Game of Thrones things. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going to go to the questions because we can do that.
Okay. One comment though on being meticulous. It's just basically sheer terror of having someone find an error after the book is out. So it's easier to correct it before it's published. So
well, let's talk about that, because one of the questions is, how much liberty can you take with facts on the book as the book is fiction? How do you decide the amount of actual factual content, incredibly credible actual factual content, and what is the fact-checking process once the book is out of your hands and with an agent or editor or people who are not you?
Right. So, I mean, I try to do as much of that on my own, but I also send the manuscript to specialized friends with specialities. So I had an Austrian woman with she's a specialty in this Austrian holiday I write about. I had her read the manuscript for errors with Austria stuff. I had a Holocaust expert read it. I had 2 Aymara indigenous Bolivians read it. I had a Bolivian journalist read it, and I had a Mexican composer read it to correct my musical references. So that's my personal way to fact check stuff, is I find an expert. So my friend Diana, who's the composer, she's, her stuff is produced all over the world. She's amazing. We happen to be in the same PhD program at the moment. So she read through the whole manuscript and she said, look, if the mother's singing this opera role, she wouldn't then also be singing this role. And, you know, I was like, wait, there's two kinds of sopranos. I mean, I knew that, but, you know, I'm not attuned to all the different kinds of sopranos and which roles they are, but she is. And so she corrected me on that and told me where I was missing South American musical notes and stuff like that. So yeah, so I do that fact checking, and then my agent does no fact checking. She's like, that's not my job. I just want to get it sellable. So she goes through it. I do probably 3 drafts with my agent. And then once my agent feels like I can sell this, then she will send it out. And then if we're lucky enough to sell it, and I have an editor, then the editor sends me an editorial letter and we go through, a zillion drafts. Probably maybe 9 drafts. I don't know, a lot.
So, excuse me. So when you say drafts, asking for a friend, how big are the changes in the drafts? What do you think constitutes a draft? Like a whole, you know, you said 9 drafts, a zillion drafts. What constitutes so many changes that it's a new draft?
I go through every word from start to finish every time. So it doesn't mean I change every word from start to finish, but every time I go through a book, I tinker. You know, I tinker with every sentence. You know, I go through, maybe not every sentence, but most of the sentences. You know, I'll go through it the 3rd time, say, and think, I can't believe I wrote a sentence this ridiculous, and change it. And I don't know if I'm just slow and other writers get it right earlier in the process, but for me, it just takes, and I mean, luckily I know that about myself. So I have pretty low expectations in my first drafts because I know that I need to go through it a bunch. I need distance. I need to kind of understand what the book is really about. Because when I start writing a book, I don't actually know what it's going to ultimately end up being about. And I feel like there's things that I'm still realizing this book is about. Even now, there's just so many, for me at least, layers to this book. So many different threads.
We don't have enough time to talk about the threads and the breadcrumbs that you drop. But I have to go to the questions because that's my job. So got started. Okay, but these are good questions. How do you know when it's finished?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I know when it's finished when my editor tells me it is. So that was an easy one.
But what would you say to those of us who don't have editors?
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, with my draft, like before I send it to my agent, who's the first step for me, I want it to be as good as I can make it all alone. So when I'm all alone writing in the dark, I just try to get it as good as I can get. When I feel like I don't know what to do to make it better, that's when it goes to my agent. And then she says, oh, I see what you could do to make it better. And then I go back. But I find that I'm lucky. I mean, usually my conversations with my agent or my editor or with whoever is looking at it, basically what they do is not so much tell me what to do. They kind of open doors saying, here's what's missing. Here's what you might want to think about. And suddenly I can go back to it with fresh eyes because I know what's wrong and I know what I kind of need to do. And that helps focus successive drafts. But I really like having deadlines. I come from a journalism background. I work really well with deadlines and I need someone to tell me when stuff is due.
It's due now.
Yeah. That's part of why I love doing this PhD. It's like, it's excellent. I have deadlines every month. Yeah, it's the best thing ever in the whole world.
So, all right. I want to get back to the question though, that I'm not sure, what's the balance of fact versus fiction?
Oh, right. Sorry, I didn't answer that. I
had a nice time chatting, but back to you.
Yeah. I would say that I stick pretty close to the facts as well as I understand them. I remember that author Janet Fitch, who wrote White Oleander, she was in London and we were having a drink. She was on her honeymoon and I was just living here, and I was talking to her about my frustrations with, so Klaus Barbie plays a role in this book. I noticed someone asked if a real person who's well-known interacted with my characters. Yes, Klaus Barbie is in my book, okay? So Klaus Barbie posed problems for me because he didn't get to Bolivia until like 1951, but I wanted him there earlier. So I was saying to Janet, like, he doesn't come till 51, but I need him to be there earlier to make the plot work. And she said, you can change history. It's a novel. Like, you just change history. Have him come earlier. It's fine. You can do that.
Good disclaimer.
Right. I mean, look what George Saunders did with President Lincoln. You know, he took great liberties. So it was nice to have that permission, and I felt like it freed me up a little bit. But I think, as maybe it's the journalism background, but I got really anxious if I changed when Barbie came, because I thought I'm going to get a lot of emails from readers saying that's not when Barbie ended up. You know, because this is stuff a lot of people know a lot about, and you don't want to mess around with. So I kept him coming in 51, and I just shifted the timeline of my book around. So the only thing, all right, so I got an interesting email from a reader, Paul Simcoe, who wrote one of those memoirs for his family. He was in Bolivia from 39 to 46, and he wrote me an email. Actually, he's written me several emails this week, but the first one said, I don't know how you know all this, but like everything in this novel is exactly how I remember it and how I lived it. And you know, who told you? Like, who have you been talking to? But someone else said to me, but I don't remember that bit that I won't give it away, but that bit that happens at the end.
I know, spoiler alert, buy the book, because
I won't say it. But she's like, the bit that happens at the end with and I said, well, I made that up. That's why you don't remember it, because it didn't happen. That part's fiction. Those aren't real people. Those are my fictional characters that I made up, and those people were acting out an ethical dilemma I would have had I been running into. Yeah, I'll stop there.
All right, so I think you answered this in terms of travel, but I want to make sure to run through questions here. So do you believe you can write credibly about a location without actually visiting there? Or was that key to your research? Will you write about Uzbekistan next? I know you talked about travel earlier, but I think the question is really about how steeped in an environment you need to be to write about it, and especially when you're writing about something that happened, before. Was that a question?
I mean, yeah, I was very lucky in that I got to be in La Paz for 4 years, and that enabled me to do this. However, you do not have to travel to write about a country or another place. I mean, it's great if you have the time and the money, but a lot of people don't have the time and the money. And I remember reading, correct me if I'm remembering this wrong, but like in the beginning of Son of the Circus, John Irving wrote that he'd never been to India, and that whole book wasn't based at all on real India. It was the India of his imagination. And reading that book, I thought I was in India. Salmon Fishing in Yemen was written by someone who'd never been to Yemen. Of course, I lived in Yemen for 4 years. So, and I'm thinking, how could you write about Yemen without being there? But that book isn't really about Yemen. So, and John Irving's book probably wasn't really about India. It was about John Irving's story he wanted to create using India. But you can create places there through what we're doing right now. You can talk to people. I did travel to Vienna. There's a lot you can find out using things like Google Earth to look at the front of apartment buildings. And because I wandered around Vienna finding the apartment building that Orly lived in, but you don't have to go to Vienna to do that. It's useful, but I don't want people to feel like they have to spend money they don't have to research something.
We're quarantined.
Yeah, and you're quarantined. So, but these days you can get around the world in various ways. And the best way to do that is to connect with people in that country, in that place. Read everything you can about that place. Read memoirs by people who've lived there. You know, if you want more specific tips, you know, you can let me know. I'll send you some. But I actually had that same question last night from a group of university students in upstate New York. And I'm sure a lot of them don't have the money to travel, but I don't think they should limit their imaginations. You know, as fiction writers, I mean, I write both fiction and nonfiction, but as fiction writers, novels ultimately a work of imagination. And if you can't imagine yourself in a different situation, in a different body, in a different culture, I mean, you do want to, I mean, you don't want to, you know, get wrapped up in cultural appropriation. And there's, you know, ways that you can be respectful of a culture. And anyway, that's a whole different conversation.
I know. I'm tempted to, okay, so back to the chat questions. Oh, Jessica, okay. How do you manage all this focus with a 10-year-old at home, especially while solo parenting?
Yeah. Well, sometimes I
Parents
just
pulled out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really stressful, but I am aware that I'm lucky to be healthy and have a roof over my head. Because we didn't have a place to live in London when we were evacuated. We had 2 days to find somewhere. So we're pretty lucky to be here. But how I manage it is I get up really early.
I'm sorry, Jessica, can you explain why you were evacuated?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, right. So I was evacuated simply because the Foreign Office, for whom my husband is working in Uzbekistan, was worried that if we got sick in Uzbekistan, we wouldn't have adequate medical care. So they evacuated us to London. And we said, but we don't have a place to live in London. Our only permanent home is in France. And they said, but you can't go to France. You have to go to London because you're British citizens. So we came here even though we could live rent-free in France and we have food there and stuff. So it's been a bit disconcerting because my daughter is doing this crazy online schooling thing and she has to get up at dawn to do school because she goes to a French school in Tashkent that's 4 hours ahead of us. So it's been a bit of a nightmare because, you know, a lot of the events I've been doing are at night, and then I get up at, 5 to get, ready for getting my daughter online. But I try to get up before her and do some writing. Because my brain is really at its best. You're getting me at the other end of the day. Is really at its best at 5 a.m. when there's nothing has come before it. My brain is not cluttered. Whereas by the end of the day, I can't write at night because I have so much clutter, all those emails and phone calls, it's all stuck in my brain, conversations I've had. I got frustrated with someone and I feel like guilty about it. And all that is cluttering up my head. Like the only moment, like when I wake up in the morning, if I just go straight to write, I don't have the clutter and it's much easier for me. I really struggle to focus later in the day. Everyone's different. Some people write better at night, but I've always been a morning person, and that's been really useful being with a young child. Because she's been fairly anxious, we tend to go to bed together. We're sharing a bed. We're in a 1-bedroom apartment, so she doesn't like to go to bed without me. So I have to get up early if I'm going to have some time alone. So that's one way I do it. But I mean, while she does have a lot of schoolwork right now, and while she works, I work. So if she's working, I work, and then we'll take a break and take a walk together. But yeah, but it's kind of been different every day, and I am so tired of meals. They just happen all the time, like dinner every night.
And dishes all the time. Okay, question. You put an incredible amount of work into this book. Yes. Worth it, buy the book. How did you decide when a story is worth becoming a novel? Do you ever get doubts about the story in the writing process?
Oh, I'm plagued by doubts all the time. Doubts are just part of it, I think, at least for me. Yeah, I have doubts as to, is this a story that I'm the best person to tell? Is this a story I can do justice to? Is anyone else writing this story? And with this particular story, it was clear that while there's some nonfiction books, there's not a novel to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, about this community. And I've met some of the last few survivors, and I wanted their stories to be remembered. I also, what was the beginning before you asked me if I was plagued by doubts? I got caught up in my doubts. When it's worth becoming a novel. Okay, well, this from the start, it was clear to me this was going to be a novel because it would have to be to encompass both Austria and Bolivia and rebuilding an entire life. So this one,
and a fictional world that the
right.
inhabit.
Yeah, so I knew that this was going to be a novel right from the start. I've written some short stories and I published some short stories, but I don't really think of myself as a short story writer, largely because I'm not great at being succinct. Pith is not my strong suit. Having said that, I have published a couple flash fiction pieces, but I tend to write long, and yeah, and things just kind of snowball. I mean, all three of my books have been far in excess of the word count I was given by my publisher. So, yeah.
So, do you have any Spanish and or German in the book? And if so, how do you notate it?
Yes, this is a very good question. And it's something I've actually been thinking a lot about as part of my PhD studies, because I'm doing a book that takes place in South America again, where it's all Spanish. But yes, there is German. Yes, there is Spanish. I use it just to kind of remind us of place. And there's one scene I really struggled with because there's characters from several different countries speaking together, and I had to find them a common language that they'd all know, and a way to talk to each other. And I knew from having watched my daughter absorb languages that a young person could absorb it very quickly. So Orly absorbs it quickly, and her parents don't. So they use more German words. She uses more Spanish. I think I'm going to confuse this book with my current one. No, we took all the foreign languages out of italics. So they're not in italics. With my first two books, there's a lot of Arabic, and there's not a daunting amount of Arabic, but there's some Arabic in it. And that is italicized, because I think when I first wrote those, I thought that's what you were supposed to do. And I've been rethinking that. And now I do not italicize those, keeping it more of a piece. I just read, I just had it near me. This book, Literary Translation by Chantel Wright, which reading this has helped me a lot think about how I use language. If you're writing something where people are essentially speaking in translation, because I mean, there's no one in this book, Exile Music, who's an English speaker. They're German speakers or Spanish speakers, but no one's an English speaker.
Oh my God. You're right, of course.
Right. So there's different ways translators, in reading about how actual translators work, there's the domestication of a language where you make the whole book sound as if it's written by an American or whatever kind of English you're using. Or you do a foreignization where you make the writing awkward enough in a similar grammatical structure to the original language, so that it constantly reminds you of its foreignness and that it was written in a different language. So, for example, in the book I'm writing now, I used the word kiddo at one point, which sounds American to my supervisor's ears. And so I changed it to, I thought, okay, how would I say that in Spanish? And, I would call my daughter, my little one, they say chiquitita or whatever. Everything ends with ita in South America. So I changed that to my little one in English, because that would be more of a translation of the Spanish. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So rather than kiddo, it sounds more like, I'm aiming for a little more neutrality. I don't want there to be words in there that sound too American and peg it to a certain place.
Right.
The same was true of Exile Music. I mean, I didn't want to use English words that would make us think, oh, New Yorker or Londoner or whatever. South Carolinian, Linnean, whatever.
Okay, so I'm feeling the meticulousness of the process. But I'm going to go back to the question. So did your
Okay.
publishing agreement require you to affirm your book as a work of fiction? And if so, how did you handle the character stories that might be true? So you interviewed people, you spoke with people, and you integrated their stories. So what's that balance?
Well, yes. I mean, my contract with my publisher was for a work of fiction. So at the top of the contract, it says Jennifer Stile is contracted to write a work of fiction for such and such. And then it goes on for a million more pages, which I don't read because that's my agent's job and it wouldn't mean anything to me. But she's very good. But I call her up and say, interpret this for me. And then she explains it to me. That's what they're for. You have to let your agent do their job. Okay, and then how did I handle character stories that might be true? Okay, so I did use bits and pieces from the people I interviewed. The people I interviewed knew I was writing a novel. They knew it wasn't for a work of journalism. It wasn't for a nonfiction book. It was for a novel. And they spoke with me on the understanding from the start that that's what I was interviewing them for. And with the understanding that I would be using bits and pieces of what they told me. So one thing Leo Spitzer told me was that one of the things he used to do as a boy in La Paz was collect these little bits of film that were called pelis, for pellicula film.
I'm sorry, what do you film? What do you mean by film?
Movie film, like actual strip.
Like the actual physical.
Yeah, like the actual strip of like it looks like a negative. Like
okay.
Back in the olden days, when I was a child, we had these negatives, and so they would look like that, and the kids would collect them because they'd be like one shot from a movie, and so you'd collect little pelis from your favorite movies, and they sold these in corner shops in La Paz, and that's a detail that I was not going to come up with by myself. So I took that from Leo Spitzer, giving him credit where it's due. And then there's another part where the Guillermo, who's still alive, he's 88 now. I interviewed him when he was 83. He came from Austria when he was 8 years old. And he told me that when he was on the ship between Austria and South America, he used to climb up. They were in the lowest class, third class cabins, and he would climb up to first class on the outside of the ship, like over the water where he could have fallen in and died, climb up to first class to watch movies because he was such a cinema fanatic that it was worth it to him to get into the movies. And he ended up building more than 3 movie theaters in La Paz and becoming the president of their movie theater foundation. And he is Bolivian. He even today could barely contain his fury at Austria and his grief over what happened. It is so powerful just in my first conversation with him. But a lot of like he told me he learned Spanish from his landlady's children. And that's how Orly learned Spanish from her landlady's kids. Because she wouldn't have been in a school yet when she got there, but I needed her to learn Spanish. And so little bits and pieces I did draw from real people, but I didn't take anyone's narrative arc.
So, we have to wrap up.
No, we're just getting going.
Hey, anyone who wants to stick around after I'm a timekeeper. Anyone who wants to hang out and unmute and talk afterwards, we can. I'm trying to be respectful of people's time. Oh gosh, what's the typical word count? Where are you getting your PhD? What's it in?
That's easy. I'm doing a PhD in creative writing. I'm doing it at the University of Birmingham in the UK. And they have a distance learning. Yeah, and they have a distance learning PhD. So you could, a lot of the people in my program are actually American, and because you only have to come over for 2 weeks a year. And I have they have the most incredible creative writing department. I'm in love. But if I were to ever end up teaching in the UK, you have to have a doctorate. It's not like the US where they just care what you've published and maybe they want you to have an MFA. In the UK, they don't care what you've published. They just want you to have a doctorate. And this I find bizarre. Yeah, it's deeply weird. I mean, my first year, you know, I have some experience teaching university, you know, creative writing, and I couldn't get it. I mean, I ended up getting this job teaching at university here through someone I met at a cocktail party. But I had to meet someone at a cocktail party and get them to feel sorry for me before I could get a job. Because just sending out CVs, they'd be like, well, you don't have a PhD, so we're not reading it. So I thought, well, fine, I'll get a PhD. If you're gonna be all pushy about that. Yeah, and I love it. I love it. I never want it to end. I want to just do PhDs the rest of my life. I just love it. So.
So I think that we have to wrap up the formal part of this. If everybody wants to put money into Venmo, so Jennifer can just infinitely, well, you can support the Writer Center, but you can also just fund her perpetual PhDs.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for coming. Jennifer, I'm just so grateful for your time, and I'm so sorry that your book tour turned out to be in my alcove. So everybody, thank you for coming.